and this is Coventry Communitas. It's a co-housing scheme aimed at single mother families suffering through statutory homelessness in Coventry. When I first started the project, I had two main focuses. The first was really driven by my own personal interest in urban design and regeneration. So when it came to choosing a site, I wanted to challenge myself and try and find a really challenging typology within an urban context. And through a research project that we did previously, I found Palmer Lane, which you would describe probably as the inner workings of an urban block. These are all high streets, commercial high streets around the sides of the block, so it's really the backside of that, I suppose. It happens to be the home to the only unculverted section of the River Sherborne within the city centre, so in 1968 the whole lot was paved over apart from this wonderful little bit here. Yeah, and that's more on the side. So initially, when I first started the project, I really wanted to dive right into a detailed interrogation of the site's opportunities and try and focus on those as opposed to the pitfalls. When you're getting involved with a challenging site, it's easy to see, oh, well, that's going to be an issue, that's going to be an issue. I really want to focus in on where the opportunities were. And the first decision I made was that I really wanted to bring this river back to the city, extend it across the site, because currently it's blocked off, it's unused, you can't access it, you can barely see it, and it's just a real shame because originally, well, historically, it was such an important part of Coventry. It's the reason why people in the first place were able to settle in the area. So I really want to reconnect the people back to the history. The second focus is obviously the brief. The rate of homelessness in Coventry is 3 times the UK average, but more specifically, 52% of those homeless households are single mother families, which I found shocking. So what I proposed was a co-housing scheme for these families who, as I said before, are suffering. They're in a cycle of temporary accommodation, essentially, where they're never in one place long enough to get back on their feet to then progress forward. And what I would call my model is true co-housing. So essentially, the families would share everything apart from, I suppose, the main essential private spaces, such as your bedroom and your bathroom. The idea of these families sharing everything is that they're constantly engaging with one another. They're constantly getting this feeling of support and stability because they're always around these other people who are going through essentially the same struggles as they are. Alongside the housing, there is a mixed-use portion. So there is a public high street market through the centre of the scheme, which would be run by the women of the community as a means for them, again, financially to try and get themselves back on their feet and push them in the right direction. So design-wise, my entire design was completely narrative-driven, so I collected real stories from women who either currently or have previously been single parents. And I really tried to hone in on the positives, not the negatives. So it was all about positive memories from them as a family or their own unique stories, which then individual stories inspired individual concepts for small shared spaces within the scheme. So these are a few examples. I'll take you through one. So this is a reading space. So I had a story from a woman who spoke about bonding with her children when she first became a single mother, bonding with her children over reading, either just reading individually in a space or her reading to them or them even reading to her. Such a simple thing, but it inspired one of these small shared spaces. So then moving forward, each of the shared spaces I then looked at through drawing, trying to look at different scales of space, spatial qualities, but also how they could be offset from larger spaces rather than being a room enclosed, how they could be offset and still engage with other things happening in the building at the same time. And then I did use modelling to look at materialities, and again integration and how one space might relate to other spaces, but also the relationship between the space and the outside as well, which I thought was really important, between the building and the public realm, but also the building and private outdoor spaces. And then the idea was that all of these smaller communal spaces would be within each of the 5 houses, would be offset from the main circulation of the house. So as opposed to, like I say, it being a separate room, it's really offset with within circulation. So as people pass through the building every day, you're constantly engaging with other activities, with other families, you're seeing other people, you're having conversations, and I really wanted to force this. I didn't want there to be an opportunity for anyone to fall into a sense of loneliness, or depending on their character, they might shy away from deliberately getting to know other people, but the idea is that you essentially don't have a choice. You are always integrating with everybody within the community. So through the design, I jumped a lot between, I tried to continuously challenge myself by jumping between that sort of micro detailed scale of small ideas and spaces to the sort of master plan overall scale. One of the first things I did was a historical mapping, layering of, to try and analyse how the site's changed in the last 120 years, this is from 1900 through to the present. And one of the themes that I grabbed right away was this use of small intricate streets with small housing units organised around, which originally would form the block. You can see how originally these spaces are a lot smaller, much more intricate, and then through firstly the Blitz, but then commercialisation of these high streets surrounding, it's become a lot more open within the inside of the block. And then that straight away inspired the layout for the high street that in the middle of the scheme. So actually it was quite surprising, the scale of the housing led itself really well to the scale of these small market style shops that form the high street. So the public realm itself is formed of 3 different nodes. So number 1 is this raised entrance level where when you come in from the Burgess, you enter at a raised level, you get this sense of arrival and you view everything that's happening within the street and around. Number 2 is the bridge that passes you over the now extended river across the site. That's a place to stop, to see where you've been, see where you might go next, but also get these amazing views down the river, the activity of the public, the shops, but also the private. You see little glimpses of the housing. And then number 3 is the point where all 4 paths, entranceways merge to form almost more of a square. So you've got a street leading into a square, a place for people to meet, for social interactions, but also to try and promote social activities. The idea is that you get a real sense of the scheme grafting into the site and growth. So it begins to break through and grow over the actual existing site and re-engage with the public surrounding the site. So what I'm going to do, because this is quite a difficult scale, I'm going to just delve into a few moments within the scheme to talk about. So this is an example of one of the living spaces, ground floor living space, where a family would come in, and above that central dining space is where that circulation would form, and that's, again, from there offset would be these shared spaces. One thing I didn't say before was that circulation space is also a way of drawing light down through the building into this ground floor, because of the confined nature of the site. Bringing as much light in as possible was really important for me. So this is an example of one of the locations where the scheme itself actually breaks through the site, the surrounding block, and, as I say, engages with the public. So the idea is that as it breaks through, you get, from the public, they get glimpses of activity inside, but it also breathes a real new life to the high streets. The Burgess and Trinity Street, which are either side of the block, used to be thriving commercial streets, and they've sort of unfortunately died a bit of the death, but it's an attempt to try and bring new life and also new intrigue to people as they pass down the street, seeing something's happening behind there, and then as you move around you then see it's an extension of these already existing commercial high streets. This is again the public space, so this is the main square. Within that space, the idea is that you're surrounded by what the shops create, this public frontage, which is your buffer between the large public space and then the private behind where the housing is. But also the materiality of the two is supposed to contrast to give that sense of difference in function, but also the contrast between the concrete being the public shops and then the timber being the much more private housing behind. And then this is one of the moments where two of the houses relate to each other, they connect over the river. So families would interact from either side. And again, it shows an example of how, so I try to, where I can, punch into this. Essentially, when I started, I had to merge my scheme in wherever I could because there was a lot of limitations. So then, once I'd done that, I then tried to pick out where I could drop in these areas, these small gardens or connections back to nature for those houses in the scheme. And then this is, in that one specific example, this is the unique view that they get from their living space down the river to where the river's culverted under the city. So just quickly, I started with my two main aims, but I think I finished essentially with three themes. The first being that I wanted to evoke new ideas about where opportunities can be found within an urban context. Secondly, I wanted to reconnect Coventry and its people to the river, but also to its history of trade and its trade culture. But thirdly, and most importantly, just to give a new lease of life for these families and an opportunity for them to get back on their feet and move forward. So thank you very much.